Ollie, what exactly was agreed to between these three sides when it comes to this partial ceasefire in the Black Sea then?
Well, Tom, let's get to the sort of theory of what's been agreed to here, because obviously for the United States, who's been trying to basically encourage to get both of these people, the Russian and the Ukrainian side of the table, to get incremental steps to that full ceasefire, this is going to be another step there. This is basically also the enforcement of the energy ceasefire that had already been agreed to a little bit about a week ago, where basically there's no more striking on energy infrastructure. But the idea here is to basically restore commercial shipping within the Black Sea in order to basically try to normalize that situation a little bit further. The issue is that we had basically 4 different statements out from these meetings, 2 from the White House, 1 from its basically meeting with Russia, with another one from its meeting with Ukraine, the Kremlin statement and the Ukrainian statement, and they don't all totally align, Tom. So this is basically what we heard from the United States, saying that basically that they will help the Russians restore access to the world market for agricultural and fertilizer export to lower maritime insurance costs. These are basically abstract ambitions, right? Basically ways in which they're going to help the Russians get back to the market. When we saw the Kremlin statement, on the other hand, they basically said that they will agree to this sort of situation in the Black Sea and this sort of partial ceasefire only if there is a lifting of sanctions, removal of sanctions on financial institutions involved in ensuring international food trade, their reconnection, these financial institutions, to SWIFT. We remember the SWIFT payment system is at the center of the sanctions regime against the Russians. Also removing sanctions on companies that are producing and exporting foods. Also removing sanctions on basically any ships that are flying the Russian flags that are involved in the sort of food trade, right? So the next question is going to be basically how much daylight is there again, and we don't really know the answer to this question, between how Trump sees things and Putin sees things, because the Trump administration has been very basically active in saying that basically the ceasefire is effectively agreed to at the highest level. They just need to work out the details. As we get closer into the actual nitty-gritty of what is being agreed in these conversations, how enforceable they are, that is going to be the sort of principal question going into a sort of full ceasefire, which the Trump administration would like to reach before basically April 20th, which I think seems very ambitious to many of the sort of observers from Ukraine and Europe.
Yeah, and Trump himself, in an interview yesterday, conceding that possibly the Russian president is slow-walking negotiations. What are the next steps from here then, Ollie?
Yeah, so listen, I mean, that interview was very sort of interesting, but I think that the next steps as far as we're concerned is basically to see what the commentary is from the United States as to whether or not this is basically what they've agreed to with the Russians. There's a big question basically of enforceability. If you start to sort of have Russian ships flying, their flag, are they basically only carrying food supplies and fertilizer? How do you basically enforce that? The Trump administration, again, wants that full ceasefire by January the 20th. Again, as you mentioned, I mean, he was on Newsmax talking about basically he's been in very similar positions in deals in sort of real estate, where basically he doesn't really want to sign the contract, but wants to stay in the game. And he's saying that that's maybe what Russia is basically doing. Our attention as far as Europe is concerned is basically looking at this EU emergency leaders meeting that is going on in Paris tomorrow. The reason that Europe is now becoming a little bit more relevant potentially in these conversations is that if SWIFT reconnection is on the table, this is part of the European sanction regime, so they're going to have to discuss that. But really for the Europeans, the main event is going to be basically discussing what they're willing to put forward in these sort of security guarantees and durable ceasefire for the Russians and the Ukrainian peace deal for Donald Trump, which is, of course, the principal question before European leaders. What can they bring to the table?